Hello everyone, I am so glad to be with you today. My name is Chris Norris. I serve as the online site pastor here at McLean Church, and I want to start by asking you a question. How many of you, when someone asks, "How are you doing?" reply with, "I'm busy"? Isn't that the number one answer today? Not like "I'm good," not "I'm at peace," not, I'm moving at a healthy pace. No, it's "I'm busy," right? We wear it like it's a badge of honor, and it's become our identity. And if we're honest, it's kind of the expected answer, right? If you actually told someone that I'm well rested and I'm moving through life at a healthy pace, they'd probably look at you like you're from another planet. But here's the question I want us to wrestle with today. When was the last time you truly felt unrushed? Think about it for a second. When was the last time you weren't racing a clock, chasing a deadline, or off to the next event on your busy calendar? Some of us probably can't remember. Honestly, I can't. So let's take a deep breath together right now, okay? It feels unusual, doesn't it? It feels awkward, maybe. That's why this message matters today, because while culture applauds our busyness, God invites us to something far better, His peace. So we're wrapping up summer, of course, and if your household looks anything like mine, you're probably feeling like it's been nonstop. Vacations, family gatherings, sports, maybe even a little chaos in the mix there. Well, this past summer, my family and I took a road trip to Disney World. Now, that's a long drive if anyone's ever done that drive, and no matter how fast I was driving, and trust me, I was driving pretty fast because I was excited to get to Disney World, and also because I had 2 kids in the backseat. But it didn't matter how fast I was going, somebody was always tailgating me, right behind me, right on my tail, wanting me to go faster. And I thought, where in the world could you possibly be going that's more important than where I'm going, to Disney World, right? In that moment, it kind of made me realize something. Isn't that what life feels like most of the time? We're always in a hurry. There's always somebody on our tail. There's always pressure to get from point A to point B faster. Last week, Pastor Brian reminded us that life is not a straight line up to the right. He's kind of used the roller coaster analogy. It's full of ups and downs, twists and turns. And if we're going to keep the amusement park theme going today, then this message is going to be more like the lazy river. Because while the roller coaster captures life's highs and lows, the lazy river reminds us of God's desired pace. It's slower, steadier, and sometimes it forces us to stop paddling so hard and simply trust the current. So here's the big idea for today. Sometimes we get so caught up in trying to live out God's purpose for our lives that we forget to move toward that purpose at God's pace. He calls us to slow down. He calls us to rest. He calls us to experience peace. Let me get personal here for a moment. Parenting can feel like you're always going at 100 miles per hour in every different direction. Between school activities, sports schedules, social gatherings, how do you find time to slow down, Chris? It's difficult. Maybe you've experienced it, either as a current parent or a parent who has lived that life. I'm always tired. Do I look tired? Actually, please don't answer that question. That's the reality, though, for so many of us. Parents and grandparents, high school and college students, we're all under a lot of pressure right now, feeling like we're moving at an unhealthy and unsustainable pace. It feels like if your kids aren't in 2 sports, 3 clubs, 4 music lessons, then you're failing them somehow. And the pressure isn't just on our kids, it's on us as parents too. The more plates you spin, the more balls you bounce, the more valuable you told you are. The busier your calendar, the better parent you must be. But here's the danger in that. If we're not careful, we start to believe those messages. We start to think that hustle is holy, that busy is blessed, but that is not what God says. And we see this everywhere, right? Not just in conversations we have at work, but on social media too. Everyone else's kids seem to be in travel sports, and families are vacationing in picture-perfect places, and parents are posting these curated highlight reels of their schedules and their lives. And if you're not careful, you can start to feel like you're failing because your life doesn't look like theirs. My wife actually follows an influencer on Instagram who talks about how she and her husband wake up at 4 a.m. to go on a date before the kids wake up, like just a date within their home. You know, they work out together, they sip coffee together, and they spend much needed quality time together before 6 a.m. Now listen, I'm not knocking discipline and good habits. I wish I could wake up at 4 a.m. But sometimes these highlight reels convince us that if we're not doing everything, we're not doing enough. And that lie can push us to keep running at a pace we were never created to sustain. Culture wants us to buy into the hustle and busyness lifestyle, treating it as normal. But you know, our culture, like I said earlier, wears busyness like it's a badge of honor. And to prove that point, I'm going to show you a few of my least favorite sayings and one-liners that I've seen on t-shirts and coffee mugs or social media posts. I'll warn you, these are definitely cringe, okay? Here's a few of them. Rise and grind. Fear is the disease. Hustle is the antidote. Here's a good one. Weekly schedule. Hustle, 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 and more hustling. That doesn't sound like a great week. Here's another one. All hustle, no luck. I don't think I believe that one, right? Everyone gets lucky sometimes. It's not all about hustle, right? Here's another one. This one I can't stand either. Work until your idols become your rivals. Ooh, yeah. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. And last but certainly not least, my least favorite ever. Nobody cares. Work harder. That can't be true. Truly somebody cares, right? Truly somebody cares how hard you're working. They might even check on you if they think you're working too hard. So anyway, those are just some fun, cringe examples of what our culture pushes into our minds. Do any of these sound familiar to you? If I put all of those on a coffee mug, it would basically say, congratulations, Chris, you're exhausted. Now drink more coffee. These slogans sell us the idea that your worth is tied to your output, that more is always better, that you prove your purpose by staying busy. But here's the truth. That's not the way of Jesus. The Bible doesn't say, blessed are the burned out, for they shall inherit overtime pay. Right? I mean, I'm joking, but still, Psalm 23, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say, he makes me hustle beside raging waters, does it? No, it says this, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. Lie down, quiet waters. I yearn for those things, don't you? Psalm 40 is another great example. It begins like this, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. Notice that word patiently. God's pace is patient and it's purposeful. Jesus himself is the perfect model of this unhurried life. He walked from town to town instead of running. He stopped to touch and heal people when everybody else wanted him to keep moving on. In fact, he waited 2 days before even going to see his best friend Lazarus because he wasn't governed by urgency. He was governed by his Father's timing and pace. Jesus refused to be rushed. We see this time and time again throughout the New Testament. In Mark 1:35, we know this verse, right? It says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place to pray. He wasn't moving fast. He was being led. There's a big difference, right? Even in the chaos, Jesus was intentional about withdrawing to rest and recalibrate. He walked. He healed. He listened. He followed God's pace. That's the way of the kingdom. And that's what so many of us struggle with. Remember the time that Jesus slept in a boat? This is a great story, right? From Matthew 8:23 and 24. It says, then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. Suddenly a fierce storm struck the lake with the waves breaking into the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. You know, I always appreciate this story of Jesus in the boat with his disciples because I find it interesting and probably intentional that Jesus chose to rest while out in the middle of the lake. Like, why didn't he rest on the beach before they set sail? Or maybe he could have waited to nap until they reached the shore on the other side. But I think he intentionally wants to lead by example here in choosing to rest in the midst of the chaos, in the middle of the lake. An intentional act that is far more than a random nap, rather a way to remind us that we too must not wait for the right time to rest, because it may never happen. Maybe you're a parent out in the middle of the lake right now. Are the waters getting rough? Are you telling yourself that you will slow down a little bit and rest once things calm down? Are your sails at full mast as you try to race across the water? Or are you finally slowing down and letting the current of the lake slowly guide you across? Or maybe you're not parenting young children. Maybe you're a grandparent carrying family worries with you. Maybe you're a student staring down the pressure of grades and expectations. Wherever you are, this message is the same. What if God is actually inviting you to rest rather than row harder? I'd like to share some reflection prompts throughout the message today, and we're going to start with this one. And I want you to think about this, write it down, put it in your phone. Where in your life are you moving at culture's pace instead of God's pace? Think about that. Where are you being misled and hurrying because of what you're being exposed to? Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, often used athletic imagery, which I can appreciate as a former athlete. In 1 Corinthians 9, he compared his life to running a race. But notice his focus wasn't on the speed, it was the endurance. It says this, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. I find practical application in this because it reminded me of how many of us are working so hard that we're burning out. We're sprinting towards something we think is that crown, right? Or we think is God's purpose or plan. And then once we reach the finish line, we realize we're exhausted and that crown we were chasing isn't going to last. So what do? We race towards the next best thing, only to be let down time and time again. Maybe you're a hardworking father who's putting in long days and you're about to break. Maybe you're a mom trying to create the perfect childhood for your kids, but you're exhausted. Maybe you're anyone who is chasing what they think is God's purpose for your life, but the pace is not sustainable. You're feeling burnt out. David reminds us in Psalm 23:2, rest is not optional, it's commanded, right? If we go back to Psalms, it says this, He makes me lie down. He makes me lie down. God sometimes forces us to stop so we don't collapse. Sadly, I've heard stories from friends or family who were operating at an unhealthy pace of life and were stopped dead in their tracks with some disheartening news. Could have been a health scare, a job loss, anything that forced them to slow down and rethink the life they were living. And isn't it true that when we finally do stop, when life forces us to hit pause, we realize how blind we were to God's presence that was right in front of us? That's why waiting and resting and slowing down is not wasted time. It's spiritual training. Remember that God's purpose at God's pace. We cannot rush this or we will miss it altogether. So how do we put this into practice? Well, here's something that I call the 2-beat rule, right? Think about your favorite song or whatever. 2 beats, right? That's it. Before you say yes to something new commitment, a new opportunity, something that's going to take your time, take 2 beats, pray, and ask. Does this align with God's purpose? And am I walking at His pace if I say yes to this? You'd be surprised at how often that pause, those 2 beats, can save you from overcommitting. I practice this often myself as a business owner, right? Sometimes I feel like if my schedule isn't full or my to-do list isn't checked off, that I have failed. I end up defining my progress and success by how much stuff I'm able to fit into my days and weeks. And yes, I am a hard worker, but I'm glorifying God through my work, and that means I must try to trust the process and move at a healthy pace. And maybe you're not a business owner, but you feel this too, right? You feel like your worth is tied to whether the laundry's done, the homework is finished, or the emails are answered. God is telling us that your worth is never tied to your to-do list. It's tied to your identity as His child. Speaking of work, over the summer, my work schedule is so inconsistent, it gives me a bit of anxiety, if I'm being honest. As someone who's self-employed, it's both a blessing and a curse to kind of have the freedom in your schedule. But I always feel like in the summer, if I'm not working or I'm not in a meeting or I'm not at a video shoot, that I'm failing or falling behind. But every summer, the same cycle happens. I slow down, I intentionally enjoy time with my family, enjoy summer, and find some rest. Guess what happens? Life goes on just fine. My business survives, the work picks back up, and all is well. And I think God is trying to remind me of something. Again, that my worth isn't defined by how busy I am. Here's a few practical steps I would love to encourage you to implement immediately, this week. First off, build Sabbath into your week. I know there's all kinds of different definitions and ways we define Sabbath, but let's keep it simple. You don't have to spend the whole day on the couch, right? Maybe it's just a few minutes or some time to rest. Whatever a Sabbath looks like to you, please find time to do it. It could be going on a walk. It could be unplugging your devices. It could be spending some time in the car listening to worship music. Whatever it is, build it into your week. Invite God into everyday moments. These can be car rides, meals with your family, bedtime routines. God is waiting for you to say, hey, I know I'm busy, but I want to find ways to keep you involved in my busyness. Again, practical ways to involve God in those busy moments in your life. Make space for Him. And third, cut the comparison trap. Social media is very dangerous, and it doesn't show the meltdowns, the arguments, or the messy house. Please stop judging your behind the scenes with someone else's highlight reel, okay? Our next reflection prompt I'd like you to take a moment to think about is this. Ask yourself, am I hustling for approval or am I resting in God's presence? And here's the kicker. It's okay to do a little bit of both. I'm not saying to clear your schedule completely and become lazy. I'm just saying you have to also create margin in your busyness for God. And you have to find time to rest in His presence. You know, if it makes you feel any better, Paul wrestled with the same tension. He wrote this in Galatians 1:10. He says, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." In other words, if your pace is set by people's expectations, we'll always feel exhausted. But if your pace is set by God, we find freedom. Friends, I want to remind you that busyness is not a badge of honor. Productivity is not the proof of your purpose. And God's purpose for your life isn't measured by how fast you go, or how full your calendar is, or how impressive your hustle looks. It's discovered by following Jesus at His pace. Slow, intentional, marked by rest, joy, peace, and His presence. So as the fall season approaches, schedules begin to ramp back up, remember this, you can live out God's purpose without outrunning His pace. What if the chaos wasn't a sign of failure, but an invitation to slow down? What if dinner time disasters became the very place you notice God's presence? What if instead of hustling for validation, you just found peace in simply being present with Him, with your family? If today's message spoke to your heart, just what you needed to hear, I know it was for me, right? I want to invite you to join our Bible app devotional this week. It's called Making Time to Rest. You can check out the QR code on the screen or by simply going to the Bible app and searching for Making Time to Rest. This is a simple study and a great way to remind yourself daily that God's pace is always better than the one culture tries to set for us. That study will begin on Monday, and it's 5 days. We'll do it together. Remember this week that God's purpose is never found in your hurry. Slow down, walk with Him, and let His peace set your pace.